Thank you, Adriano, for briefing us the work of South Center, especially in the area of finance, the work on tax cooperation among developing countries, work on illicit financing. All of these can be very important in generating and preserving resources that flow out of developing countries. So thank you for introducing us. I'm sorry to rush you, but the time is short for all of us. Yeah, so let me now turn to our next speaker, Ms. Roxana Mazzula from Center for Studies and Policy Development in Argentina. If you can try to sum up your presentation in 5
First of all, let me thank you for the invitation. I am pleased to be here once again. And I would like to emphasize 3 points, 4 questions and 5 proposals about South-South cooperation and financial on SDG with a special attention in the social situation in Latin American countries. First, let me have one consideration about SDG and the heating debate of inequality and the reasons of inequality. The SDG has a high level of formality. For instance, who cannot agree that we have to have zero hunger, non-poverty, and decent work? The SDGs express good intention and everyone agrees with them, but the heating debate is the debate related to inequalities. It is the inequality among countries rather than in countries that continue to explain most of the world's inequality. Therefore, changes are necessary in a global scale in which the increase of international commerce in Latin America or only with more development finance will not be enough to reduce inequalities. For instance, it's necessary to emphasize to address the new regulation in international financial flow. Capital mobility must be balanced through workforce mobility. This year, I had the opportunity to participate in one G20 conference in Argentina. And I talked about what was the impact on trade on the reduction of inequality in Latin America. My conclusion was, it's impossible to reduce the inequality only with trade or with superfluous modification of income in Latin America. Our politicians discuss all the time how to reduce poverty, but we know poverty does not mean inequality. Modifying inequalities implies long-term processes and not merely refer to gender gap, property, distribution of land, and concentration of political powers and influences. Secondly, Latin America presents a vast inequality with conditions or manners of distribution of resources. In a world where capital reproduction demands specific roles in the international labor divisions, our country had not succeeded in designing institutional framework that can mitigate this global disparity, but which rather make it explicit. And as you know, this is political. Economic decisions are not taken out of the blue, but they do depend on political ideology. Latin America is the second most unequal region of the world, only behind Sub-Saharan Africa, and this inequality presents some specific feature. It principally affects children. There are a large territorial disparities. For instance, in Brazil and Argentina, the richest lands are 8 times as rich as the poorest lands, whereas in Italy, France, and Spain, the gap is reduced to just twice. The chances are very high that disparity will persist in the future unless we are global changes as well as changes in the productive and social heterogeneity of the region. Thirdly, all things considered, let us then admit that the South-South cooperation have to promote some debate and question related development finals on SDG. One of them is in relation to classification of country for aid receipt. Do they have to receive development finals according to the structural characteristic of the countries or according to their income? Another thing we could wonder about is regarding the permanent doubt about the capacity of low-income countries to absorb large inflow of external assistance. But should we not think that absorptive capacity depends on the very modality of aid? On the other hand, we have to consider the problems of very modality of aid and the real appropriation of the proliferation of funds. Are the area or the country where these funds are displayed really priority? And the fourth point had to do with what is new and what is not. When is finance innovative? There is a certain misconception that the agenda for development portrays new ways of financing for development. However, it isn't new. If philanthropic SARs are sometimes classified as innovative, this is essentially due to the greater volume and diversity. The principle itself is not innovative. More clear considered innovative are the new levy taxes or parafiscal bases that have been introduced or that have been proposed. Finally, I would like to make a few proposals for thinking together about the subject of inequality and the role of the South-South cooperation in relation with finance development on SDG. First, we need to enhance the debate and visibility of the effects of the international crisis on inequality. Each international crisis has an impact on growth and increases inequality. This affects the lower sector worse than the rest of the population. While the richer sector can reconstitute themselves after these shocks, the lower sector always falls back to a weaker starting point. Secondly, it's imperative to limit external indebtedness, which curtail the margins of autonomy of country, and to mobilize internal resources. This was a lesson that came at high social cost in Latin America in the 2000s. And now Argentina has again the endless problem of external indebtedness. We are the country in the world that has contracted more external debt in the last year, and it is not for investment but for current expenses. In third place, financing of integration is crucial. Regional integration is a powerful factor in reducing vulnerability. So far, it does not appear that external financial has been sufficiently affected to this end. Fourthly, it's crucial to rescind the logic of the right and SDGs from the gaps. For instance, investment, productivity and innovation gap, income gap, inequality, and social security. For the end, and in fifth place, what development model we are considering for the region to reduce inequality. This is a persistent debate in Latin America and Argentina. It seems that By short-selling commodities all over the world, we have not succeeded in reducing inequalities. Should we not try to take part of digital and services revolution to overcome the age-old dilemma between farming and industry? In this framework, we have to rethink the functional distribution of income and the role of social security, because these are relevant tools of distributions. In the last year, it was possible to reduce inequality in Latin America was for these important tools, although, of course, it was not enough. After all, inequality reduction depends on political decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roxana, for sharing your insightful remarks on reducing inequalities and what role can cooperation and finance can play, and especially in Latin America, we know this is a region which started with very high inequalities, but some of the countries have managed to bring it down, especially Brazil has brought it down with emphasis on social protection. So I think Asia has much to learn from Latin American countries, because in Asia you see sharpest rise in inequalities all in major countries, including in India, in China, in Indonesia, wherever you see. So with that, we have listened to all our panelists. We have actually run out of the time for this session, but we started 10 minutes late. So maybe we can spend a few minutes for some burning questions. Yes, I see General Chopra, then this hand. There are 4 hands. So we'll just stick to these 4. General Chopra, please. Can somebody bring mic? Yes. Very short, crisp questions, and you can direct them to any one of the panelists.
It's a very super idea. I'll repeat that. Thank you, Chairman Nagesh. This is to you. It's a very super idea, this business of transactional tax. $700 billion is what I heard. How much do you think this is going to be acceptable? Because taxation, even locally, say India, Pakistan, any country, is very unpopular. Number 2, to me it looks like too much. Number 3, I feel nations might take it as an infringement into their sovereignty. And finally, how do you propose to make this tax mandatory? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. I'll respond to that. Let us take the other questions. Yes. Who are the other? Yes.
I had a very specific question for Mr. Yuri. You were suggesting that there is a range of methods in which development finances have been mobilized in the last 10 to 15 years across countries. And it's also about how the ODA seems to be getting reinterpreted from the other countries. But the fundamental point which we are still struggling is that finances are extremely scattered, and they don't seem to be seeing any continuity across government finances, private sector finances, alternate tax systems that have been created. As a result of which, there is a difference between the visioning of SDGs versus the provisioning. Can we look at some mechanism whereby there is a mechanism of streamlining the entire finance mechanism to have a better continuity across strategies? That's point number 1. Secondly, as we keep working with the number of state level and district level functionaries, we find that SDGs seems to have got accepted at the top as an agenda setting, but at the subnational level, very little ownership seems to be taking place. How do we look into such categories?
And there were 2 on this table. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is about the financing gap. I think we are looking in terms of the traditional way of program and project design and implementation. And we are missing out a very important resource which we all have in plenty, and that is the human resource. So if we go in for a high degree of social mobilization, community mobilization in most of our projects and programs related to SDGs, we can really bring down the finance cost per se quite a lot. And it has many other advantages. Project becomes more robust, community ownership, and also it's much more efficient. And I think the SDGs provide us with a good opportunity to really mobilize the community. Example, we have the NREGA program in India, where there's a lot of labor in the villages which really are not clear about what they should do. We have had community mobilization campaigns in Cuba for education. We had the Teach India initiative by a prominent newspaper in India. I think we need to tap this resource.
Yes. Okay. Well, before that, Jyoti, and then.
I just wanted you to comment on one aspect. You talked about how Brazil has brought down its inequalities, but when we do basic macroeconomic goals which conflict with each other, it is also marred with a lot of unemployment which is there, which is rising. So how do you trade off between the two?